morning. My name is Ellen Rogan, and I'm going to give you an introduction to the ins and outs of the DAR application process, along with some tips to help make it an easier experience. I come to this as a member of the DAR since 1998, a serious genealogist since the 1980s, and a registrar with the DAR since 2000. I've assisted many women who have wanted to join the DAR, and along the way have learned many tips in working through the research process. As you are aware, research has changed greatly since the internet. My original DAR application was submitted with the documents that I mailed away for over years of doing my own family tree. I have to admit that I've always been a history lover, with the Revolutionary War being my favorite era. As a result of my journey, starting with trying to find ancestors in America during that time period. So what is a lineage society? Easily defined, it's an organization that has requirements to join based on ancestry and a set criteria. There are many societies with many different membership criteria. Some include military service, such as the DAR, colonial wars, the descendants of 1812, or the Civil War societies. There are also early settler societies like the Society of Mayflower Descendants and the Colonial Dames. Occupational societies such as the descendants of farmers, descendants of tavern owners, and my favorite, the descendants of witches. Locales such as the founders and early settlers of cities, states. An example of that is the descendants and founders of New Jersey. A newer one, based on slavery, is the National Society of the Sons and Daughters of the United States Middle Passage. Since our focus today is the DAR, we'll be focusing on their guidelines and criteria, which are proof of lineal descent from a man or woman who gave military, patriotic, or civil service to the cause of independence. The time frame is April 19th, 1775, the Battle of Lexington and Concord, Massachusetts, through the 26th of November, 1783, the withdrawal of British troops from New York. A caveat to that time requirement includes those who took part in the Sons of Liberty, Committees of Correspondence and Safety, the Boston Tea Party, and proven patriotic involvement of this type before April 19th, 1775. I'll assume that most of you are already into the world of genealogy, either as beginners, experienced hobbyists, or dedicated family historians. The steps on the screen, most of you are familiar with. Obviously, for DAR, being in or involved in the revolutionary cause requires connections to America in the mid-1700s. As we all know from our history, there were some foreign nationals, Native Americans, and free and enslaved Blacks who fought with the Americans or gave money. If they and their involvement can be proven and documented, descendants are eligible to join the DAR. The DAR has a specialty research committee and a special research task force that helps those descendants. They have a knowledgeable research task force and a group of researchers, and they provide bibliographies, videos, and some lists of already proven patriots to help those who are researching. More on this later. I have often told prospective members that if you can find one patriot for the DAR, there are probably many more to find in research. Genealogy is math when you look for ancestors, and so DAR patriots will most likely be in your line between generations 7 and 9. At generation 7, you have 256 great-grandparents. Generation 8, 512, and generation 9, 1,024. They will have been born sometime between 1710 and 1765. I have proven 13 of my Revolutionary War ancestors and have at least 10 or more that I need to research and break down my brick walls to include. So who was a Revolutionary War patriot? They were men and women who aided the cause of independence through proven military, civic, or patriotic action. There are 4 types of acceptable service for membership in the DAR. The first, the signers of the Declaration of Independence. There were 56 signers from 13 colonies. Each colony sent a different number of delegates. Pennsylvania had the largest contingent and Rhode Island the smallest. New Jersey had 5. Undoubtedly, the largest percentage of patriots provided military service. This was either as Minutemen, local militia companies, or service as Continental soldiers. Many of the 13 colonies had companies which started as militia and ended up as state troops or Continental forces. One of my own ancestors, Captain Thomas Pierce, began in the Massachusetts militia. His company became part of the Continental forces as Knox's battalion of artillery. His group marched with Washington to New York, where assigned to the Continental Army at the Battle of Long Island, or Brooklyn, as those of us born in Brooklyn say. Thomas escaped with the army up the Hudson during the disastrous campaign and served at the supply depot in Fishkill near West Point. He never returned to Massachusetts, married, and started a family there. Remember when doing your research that soldiers moved around and sometimes never went home. Women with military service are quite rare. The picture on the slide depicts Margaret Corbin, known as Captain Molly. Revolutionary War heroine Margaret Corbin is most commonly remembered for a single act, taking over her husband's cannon during the Battle of Fort Washington in 1776. This act resulted in her becoming the first woman to receive a pension from the United States military and immortalized her as Captain Molly, one of the nation's first female war heroes. Her story and the story of Mary Hayes Macaulay have become merged over time. According to legend, at the Battle of Monmouth on June 28, 1778, Mary Hayes, wife of artilleryman William Hayes, carried water to cool both the cannon and the soldiers in her husband's battery, hence the nickname Molly Pitcher. Legend also asserts that when William Hayes collapsed and was wounded, she took her husband's place in the gun crew for the rest of the battle. There is still debate over the story of Molly Pitcher at the Battle of Monmouth. More common for women was patriotic service, which I'll talk about a little later. Ancestors credited with civil service performed functions within the local patriotic government to support the operation of the town or states. Serving as a town selectman or serving as a county justice are examples of actions that may qualify for civil service. My ancestor, Johnson Tolman, was a fence viewer. A fence viewer administered fence laws by inspecting new fences and setting disputes caused by trespass of livestock that had wandered onto another's property. Patriotic service is the broadest category of Revolutionary War service. Ancestors are credited with patriotic service when documentation is provided to show that they supported the war effort through word or deed in a non-military capacity. Serving on a patriotic committee, paying certain taxes set to fund the revolution, furnishing supplies to the army, or signing an oath of allegiance are just a few of the actions that qualify as patriotic service. The slide shows an image of the Boston Tea Party, an event which took place 2 years before the first shots were fired at Lexington and Concord. These patriots are eligible for patriotic service. Proving participation in this particular event is difficult, as there is no complete list of the men who took part. My one ancestor, John Hicks, is listed as one of the participants, but I have yet to find supporting documentary evidence to prove this involvement. He is, however, one of my patriots in DAR for patriotic service. He acted as a sniper in Cambridge as the British retreated from Lexington and Concord. He was killed by the British and left on the street. His body was found by his son. John Hicks' story is captured in the diary of a neighbor and written down in a book of Cambridge history. He and 2 others were killed that night, and a monument stands to the memory of the Cambridge martyrs. The second image is a receipt for a horse that proves patriotic service for the man who gave it. As I said before, most women who did service during the Revolution gave patriotic service. The image on the slide shows a common role for women in their caring for the wounded. Other women served as camp followers, wives who followed their husbands in the war, taking care of their needs. Often these women would cook and sew for others in the camp. Women who were at home might sell produce and livestock or handmade items. All these services would need to be proven with receipts or documents before they are accepted by DAR. One way you can prove women's service is if they own property. Women and sometimes widows and sometimes wealthy single women would own property, and many states had taxes that supported the war effort, and proof of paid taxes of this type is acceptable for service. New Jersey had those types of taxes to support the war. The Revolutionary War has quite a bit of materials, both online and repositories. Fold 3 and Ancestry have copies of the combined service records, pensions, and bounty land warrants, but not everything is online. However, it is a good place to start. Make yourself familiar with the history of the county you are researching and see what in that county history is recorded in chapters about the Revolutionary War. Sometimes diaries can be helpful to locate service when other routes fail. The compiled military service records and a set of cards containing transcriptions or abstractions of muster rolls and payrolls can be found on Fold 3. These cards are grouped by state and service and military unit, and then by soldier's name. This compiled military service record card can serve as evidence of service. Company rosters are also useful in that men were enlisted usually within a town with friends and relatives. Rosters are listed in both published forms by state in local histories of towns and counties and in archives. Pension records are valuable records as they not only prove details about the military service performed by the individual, but also offer personal details, family information, and residence or migration information that helps confirm the identity of the individual who performed the service. The first federal pension was offered in 1780 to widows and orphans of Revolutionary War soldiers. In 1818, the law was expanded as invalid pensions were granted. The soldiers needed to prove disability and poverty to qualify. In 1832, the Extended Pension Act granted pensions to those who could prove service under pension guidelines, as well as widows of a certain age. Many states issued pensions for soldiers of their states who performed military service, or for widows or heirs of deceased soldiers. The availability of these pensions vary from state to state. Several states also issued tracts of land called bounty land as payment for service of soldiers. The most common type of Revolutionary War pension and bounty records were issued by the federal government. Well-documented histories and town records can be used for proof, most especially civil and patriotic service. Town records record the election of town officers and often record events during the war. Other county and town histories get their data from town records. My ancestor, James Nichols, is listed in the history of Belfast, Maine, as having forced the Tory commander to release ammunition he was withholding, thus restoring it to the Patriot cause. This I used for proof of patriotic service. One of the most famous Revolutionary War accounts was the diary of Joseph Plum Martin. Martin was a soldier in the Connecticut Militia who re-enlisted in the Continental Army. He wrote a narrative of his life as a Revolutionary War soldier, and it is considered one of the major primary sources for historians, researchers, and reenactors. Accounts such as these, if your ancestor wrote them, would be a source of documentation of service. The federal government and some states who held Western Reserve land gave bounty lands and grants for Revolutionary War service. These can be used as proof of service for the DAR. 9 states awarded bounty lands to soldiers. They were Connecticut, Georgia, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and Virginia. Early federal bounty land warrants could only be used in military districts, primarily in Ohio and several other public land states in the former Northwest Territory. You can find many New Jersey Revolutionary War veterans migrating into the Ohio Territory when researching pension documents. On the slide, it's two images from the Military Bounty Land Grant from Ancestry. The first image is a grant assigned to Major Benjamin Brooks of Maryland for his service in the Continental Army. The second image is a deposition assigning the grant to his only heir, Anne Marie Brooks. It is important to determine correct service as to find a man with the service. Service determination follows logical guidelines. For example, an 18-year-old man will in all probability not be eligible for civil service. He's too young and not mature and respected member of the community. The role must fit the person. Another example would be a man who cannot write or read would not be the town clerk or a judge. Look for clues about the person to determine the best place to look for service. Most will be found in military service. Men too old to serve are more likely giving civil or patriotic service. Though uncommon, older men are sometimes found in the rank and file of the militia, but this is usually a role for a young man. My ancestor, Samuel Leeds, my first Revolutionary War patriot, was from Dorchester, Massachusetts, and at the militia alarm to Lexington and Concord. Because he is listed as an old man in the pension of another local man, his age was not questioned in the DAR application. Establishing a location of residence for a specific ancestor is an important part of verifying that the particular ancestor was the same man who performed the Revolutionary War service. The location of residence must be appropriate within the context of the lineage from the patriot to the applicant. If the ancestor was married or had children born during the Revolutionary War, the vital records of those events is a good way to show that the ancestor was living in a specific area at that time. Residence might also be established with other local records. You can use the buying or selling of land, acting as a witness for a will or deed or court transaction, or appearing on a local census or tax list in a specific area to establish that your ancestor was in a specific location at a specific time. It's best to locate a source of residence that can link the ancestor to the location and to his family. For example, the inclusion of his family members in a tax record may help confirm that this record pertains to the right patriot you might be researching. Tax assessments during the years of the war are one way to determine a residence of the patriot in the Revolution. Though this tax record is for the year 1801, it resembles earlier tax records of the war period. Paying tax on property in a specific town or county is one way to locate your patriot in set location. Pay attention to the assessment. There are clues in the document that can show wealth and status. That can aid in determining the correct man for the correct service. Usually, the wealthier the person, the more likely they will be older and have higher military rank or respected civil service positions. Land records are valuable in that they will often lay out property lines within towns and also list neighbors in the property line descriptions. This map is of Stoughton, Massachusetts, and lists the names of the homeowners on the various roads of the town. My ancestor, Johnson Tolman, is listed on this map and helped determine his residency in Stoughton, Massachusetts. Children born during the Revolutionary War years are a great way of proving residency of a patriot. Church records and civil birth records can document a patriot's hometown during the Revolution. Marriage records often list the towns of the couples, which can also prove your patriot's residency and lock down the right man to the right service, especially in the case of common names. There are many who contributed to the patriot cause from many nationalities and ethnic groups. Those who lived in this country include Blacks, Native Americans, Spaniards, and Jews. There were also those who came from aboard to assist in the fight, most notably the French. The DAR has termed Black and Native American patriots as forgotten patriots. Forgotten in that they have, up until the early 21st century, been overlooked by lineage societies and military historians. Much research has been done by the DAR Committee for Minority Service to expand and illuminate the Native Americans and Blacks that fought for our independence. On this slide is an image of the book Forgotten Patriots, researched and edited by a past library director of the DAR. The web link below the image is the path on the DAR website for the full downloadable copy of the book. Plainfield Library also has a hard copy of this book in the archives. Both slaves and free Blacks fought and assisted in the Patriot cause. Black participation was complicated by the fact that the British offered freedom for Black slaves who ran away to fight with loyalist troops. Slave owners sent their slaves to fight for them as replacements, and though promised freedom at the end of the war, were sometimes returned to slavery. The list of Black patriots is growing with the work and research of the Minority and Specialty Research Committees in DAR. Reach out if you need help with this expanded but still tricky research. The woodcut on the slide shows the image of a well-known Black patriot, Peter Salem, who shot Major Pitcairn at the Battle of Bunker Hill in Massachusetts. Native American participation, like Black participation, was divided. The British capitalized on the fact that as the colonists in America wanted to expand territory, the Native Americans were in conflict over their land. Many of the tribes throughout the colonies fought on both sides of the war. In New York State, the 5 tribes of the Iroquois Confederacy divided between the colonists and the British. Residents of New Spain supplied money, troops, and cattle to the Americans during the war. The King of Spain declared a 1 peso tax to be paid by every resident of New Spain to fund the American Revolution. Bernardo de Galvez, shown on this slide, led troops into the area that became the Northwest Territory to fight the British on the frontier. The map shows the extent of New Spain during the American Revolution. The Jewish population in America was not overly large, but they participated by fighting, providing supplies, and by financing the revolution. One famous Jewish patriot was Chaim Solomon, who paid American loan debts to the French government. These images show his likeness and a copy of the draft paying American loan debts. The DAR has a growing list of Jewish patriots who have proven service by the DAR. Research is ongoing by prospective members and staff to prove more. More than military service, women will most often be recognized by the DAR for their patriotic service. This slide shows Esther DeBert Reed, wife of Joseph Reed, who founded and organized the Ladies of Philadelphia. These ladies went door to door asking for donations and raised $300,000 for the American troops during the war. The other image shows both Black and white women aiding the care and wounding of soldiers after the battle. If you're trying to prove a forgotten patriot, always start with the DAR website for minority research. Look as well at the Committee for Specialty Research. This is a new committee formed only this year. There are videos and brochures to get you started. Once you've looked at the tips on the DAR website, look more specifically at the geographic area where your patriot lived. For example, minority service in New Jersey is most likely going to be with Black patriots. Go to your local library and historical society for untapped resources. For example, resources at the Drake House and the library here at Plainfield probably can help with local history sources. Tap the brains of these dedicated keepers of history to learn about what they know and what their repositories have. Finally, search the web for new websites and areas of research. But remember, they must be documented for the DAR to accept these sources. This slide shows pages 1 and 2 of the DAR application form. On page 1 is the basic information about yourself, the name of your patriot, and the signatures of yourself and the organization. Page 2 is the lineage, starting with you and working back to the patriot. You are generation 1. Page 3, not shown, is where you would list your proof documents for each generation. And finally, page 4 lists the patriot, his service, his residence, and the sources of the residence and service documentation. Also listed but not required are the children. You only need to document the child who is your direct ancestor. The final image is an example of an old DAR membership certificate. Finally, I want to touch on the kind of proof documents that DAR accepts for applications. As I said earlier, the first 3 generations require birth, marriage, and death vital records. Exceptions are rare and are handled on a case-by-case basis. Remember that vital records need to include the name of the parents of the child. This way, the lineage is set from one generation to the next. Oops. Birth, marriage, and death records are the best and easiest way to prove lineage. However, we all know about the missing record, the burned courthouse, the baby born at home, the man who disappeared without a trace. You may also find that the state you are researching in didn't start regular reporting of vital records until much later in time. For example, Pennsylvania didn't start reporting births, marriages, and deaths until 1893. Anything you need earlier, church records are your best and sometimes only source. Massachusetts, however, started documenting right from the start. Records of Boston and Dorchester, Massachusetts can be found for 1630 forward. For these applications, however, the newest generations, 1, 2, 3, are recent enough. Reporting of life events is pretty easy, but is required for the 20th century. Census records can be used as parent-to-child proof from 1880 forward. The U.S. Census started documenting the relationship between each household member to the head of household with the 1880 census. Some state censuses documented relationships slightly earlier. State censuses are usually every 10 years on the 5th year of the decade. New York State, for example, listed the relationship in censuses before 1880 and is very useful. U.S. Census from 1850 through 1870 can be used for age approximation and location. However, remember that the census taker often did not talk to family members when they recorded the data. For those ancestors who do not have vital records for your lineage proof, wills and deeds can be helpful. Wills that list children, bequests to parents, sons and relatives, probate documents such as orphan court records, and probate account documents can give hints or solid proof of relationships. Wills can give a maiden name to a woman who has left money in her father's will, such as my daughter Mary, the wife of Henry Jackson. These can be valuable. Deeds and property transfers can be the missing piece that will link a father to a son. Deeds that sell property for $1 or a small amount of money are a clue to a family tie. Witnesses to wills and deeds can link members of the family. Finally, a deed that has language such as, I give to my son John the land left to me by my father Henry Jackson, gives you a 3-generation link that any genealogist would love to find and the DAR will accept. Bible records are another source to document births, marriages, and deaths. Requirements of documentation when using these must include publication date of the Bible and the name and address of the holder of the Bible if one is known. Sometimes the locations of births, marriages, and deaths are not included in the Bible record, and so one should try to find another source to add for event location. Diaries can give interesting and useful information about family, friends, and events. My third great aunt gave a charming and intimate look at Christmas in our family in the mid-1800s. Along with a description, she gave a synopsis of all the relatives, their relationship to one another, and a history of their English origins. It made further research easier and pointed me in the right direction to look for earlier generations. Newspapers are great to find obituaries, birth, death, and marriage announcements when trying to prove dates and location of family events. Along with the vitals, these often name other relatives, parents, and grandparents. Articles reporting parties or accidents and newsworthy stories often fill in the gaps and give flavor to your family story. One DAR applicant found an article about the abuse endured by her great-grandmother. Though certainly not the kind of story one wants to find, it gave background and explained why she and the children were found living with her parents, with her husband nowhere to be found. On the on the image on the left is the news report for Martha Mitchell, not Margaret Mitchell, dying from pneumonia. Among the particulars in the news story is the fact that she developed the pneumonia after fracturing her hip. The other image gives a list of family members of the deceased Allison Mitchell, including the fact that his wife is deceased, the names of the children and stepchildren. Finally, we see that he's buried in the Cypress Hill Cemetery in Brooklyn, New York, which may be another avenue of research. So let's talk about genealogies. Genealogical standards have changed through time. Most published genealogies from the 19th and early 20th century would never be considered appropriate resources by the DAR. Most of these older genealogies do not list the sources used for the information found in the genealogy. Though some may have used vital records, Bible records, and first-hand accounts by family members, the fact that there is no source documentation makes them unusable as proof. Since the genealogical proof standard, 21st century genealogies are a much more creditable source. However, with the sources listed in the genealogy, DAR would still prefer that the applicant track down the primary source used by the writer if possible. Whoops. Sorry. Maps should be part of the genealogist's toolkit, just like all the other sources already discussed. The map pictured is of the area of Mulberry Street where my great-grandfather died. His death record gave the address, and so I pulled up the map to get a sense of where he was in New York City. For me, it filled in backstory, but maps also include names of neighbors and locations of churches. If you have trouble finding a church record, look at the maps in the neighborhood the person lived to see the various churches in that neighborhood. These are just some of the resources available online you can use to start your research. Most are available through your library card, but others are free for all. The research and documentation process can be easy or difficult, depending on how much work you have done, or if the patriot you have found had a lot of descendants. The best way to move forward is to work through the lineage to find a patriot already accepted by the DAR. This method guarantees the easiest path to membership. You can either work with a chapter registrar, which is what I would recommend, or hire a professional researcher. The choice is up to you. I will touch a bit later on the pros and cons of each method. So how do we find a DAR chapter? We contact the National DAR website. We look from area chapters on Facebook or on the web. We ask at local libraries and historical societies if they know of the chapters. Maybe we have a friend who is a member and they can bring you into a chapter for a meeting to see what you like. DAR chapters are like people and they come in all shapes and sizes. When considering which one you want to join, you should find out as much as you can. If you have a friend in a local chapter, the decision can be easy. Each DAR chapter has its own flavor. Chapters usually promote various DAR projects, and so will focus their interest and attention in that direction. My chapter works hard on projects to support veterans in DAR schools. Recently, we have been helping the Old Tenant Church and Cemetery clean gravestones and place markers on the graves of Revolutionary War soldiers buried in the cemetery. One of our chapter members has a strong interest in conservation, and so we've been working on a variety of conservation projects, including cleaning beaches and collecting plastic bags to create beds for the homeless. Fees are another issue that you need to consider. After the fees for the one-time application, dues are also different among chapters. Some chapters own historic properties, and so members give tours and write historical preservation grants. And there are many different services DAR members perform. You just need to find the right one. Most chapters have websites and Facebook pages. Look around and see what each chapter does. Then reach out to see if you like the group and their projects. As I said before, I would recommend researching with a chapter registrar. Most are trained and have their experience of working within the DAR guidelines and system. Registrars are knowledgeable and have access to DAR files and resources. They know protocols and what DAR considers acceptable proof documents. Best of all, they'll help you for free. Be aware that DAR registrars cannot charge you for help with an application. The downside of using the DAR registrar is that you are expected to collect documents and help with the application. Each registrar works differently. Some registrars like myself love the work and they're pretty skilled with utilizing what can be found online. Many go the extra mile and find the proof documents wherever possible. Some registrars, if the repository is local, may go to the state archives to search documents. That is not always the case, and you may be expected to go yourself. A knowledgeable registrar will at the very least point you in the right direction. One caveat I must stress is that it gets expensive ordering documents from state archives and municipal record repositories. Fees can be steep. However, if you have the documents, DAR will accept photocopies and will also accept a lower priced genealogy copy, which can usually be purchased at a lower cost from a government records repository. If you choose the route of a professional researcher, you can find one at a variety of ways. You can contact the Association of Professional Genealogists, local historical societies, or local genealogy organizations like the Genealogical Society of New Jersey. A friend of mine was contacted through the Monmouth County Genealogy Club to do research for a well-known person. If you're hiring a professional researcher, they will do the research and the collecting of documents for you. However, the more information you have to give them will expedite and cut some of the costs. Going this route is expensive, and I've heard that sometimes the work done by professionals does not pass the application process of DAR. No matter which way you proceed, it is a time-consuming process if you've not done any of the document gathering to date. So now that I've given you an overview of the process, what is my story? I've been researching my family for a very long time with very little knowledge going forward. My father knew about his grandfather, who was a sea captain in Maine. He knew nothing else about his paternal line. His mother's last name was Brown, and that was an interesting brick wall to start for me. My mother knew the most about her mother's family, who came from Germany and settled in Sullivan County, New York, nothing more. On her father's side, we knew a little. Her grandmother was a Kelly or a Kiley from, we think, County Cork, and her grandfather, we knew nothing other than he came to America in 1870, and his name was Forrester. All the work really had to be done. I started with my father's family, low-hanging fruit, as they say. There was a book and pictures. This is a picture of the book Searsport Sea Captains, compiled by the Penobscot Museum of Searsport, Maine. In the book are pictures and biographical sketches of numerous members of my family. My great-grandfather, Captain Charles Waterhouse, his father-in-law, brothers, and nephew. It got me started and gave me a goal. How long was this branch of my family here? What could I discover? It's been a long and exciting journey that has taken me through New England and New York State. I asked questions of my parents while they were alive and wish I had them now for more questions. There were little to no family papers or heirlooms, and so I started at close to ground zero. I discovered I am a descendant of Mayflower passengers, the Great Migration to New England, Revolutionary and Civil War soldiers, an illegitimate child from Germany, immigrants from England, Ireland, and the West Indies, and many yet uncovered. Here are things that I've discovered in my research. Two of the images are from the Penobscot Marine Museum. The family portrait is Captain Charles Waterhouse and his wife Mariah and their two children. Charles Young Waterhouse and George Sawyer Waterhouse, who was my grandfather. The picture was taken in Bremerhaven, where his ship was loading and unloading cargo. His family traveled with him on his voyages, as many sea captains' families did. Charles, the younger of the two children, was born at sea. The two pictures in the center are Mariah's grandmother and Mariah's father, George Frederick Wall. These were given to me by the Wall family. We discovered each other through my research. Finally, is the portrait of a very young and rather handsome Captain Charles Waterhouse, taken before the hard life of the sea took its toll. I estimate Charles was about 26 in this picture. Charles was only 38 when he died in Australia. So I'm not finished yet. If you commit to genealogy as a lifelong project, you will find, like I did, that you are never finished. There are brick walls, unproven parents, and mysteries. Some of my questions, if solved, would lead me to more leaves on my genealogical tree and more patriot ancestors. I can't wait. Elizabeth Hatch could have come from Cape Cod or Maine. I've yet to figure out where. Asa Waterhouse, Captain Charles's father, is probably the son of Joseph Hatch Waterhouse, but I have yet to prove it. Finally, another example is Benjamin Young, a Seasport sea captain who came from St. George's, Maine. I believe his father is William Young, who sailed a ship during the Penobscot expedition of the Revolutionary War. I'd like to introduce you to two projects of the local history department that I'm coordinating. Both involve the Revolutionary War and the late 18th century era in Essex County, New Jersey. Why Essex County? Many of the men who lived in the area we now call Union County then lived in Essex County. Union County was formed from portions of Essex County in 1857. The project hopefully will fill out information about Essex County soldiers of the Revolution. I'm trying to put together wills, vital records, pension records, cemetery records, and genealogies to create a fuller picture of the men and women of the area. The second project involves a similar approach, but is documenting the men of the militia of 1793. The census records of New Jersey for 1790 through 1820 have been lost, and it's my hope that this project will help fill in some of the gaps. I want to thank you for your time and attention. I hope you found this presentation interesting and helpful. If you have any questions, we have some time to answer them now. Thank you.